Why did the room go quiet the moment her shoulder hit the floor, papers sliding away from her boots like they didn't belong to her anymore? She felt it before she understood it. The silence, thick, heavy, the kind that presses against your ears harder than noise ever could. Sarah Mitchell crouched instinctively, knees touching the cold mesh floor of the mess hall, gathering scattered pages that only minutes ago had felt like her proof of worth. Satellite overlays, handwritten notes, patterns no one else had bothered to see. Her face burned, but her hands were steady. They had learned that discipline early. Emotion could wait. Mission first. Around her, boots scraped, chairs froze mid-motion, conversations died unfinished. She didn't look up yet. She didn't need to. She already knew who stood behind her. Staff Sergeant Harrington had a presence, loud even when he wasn't speaking. The kind of man who filled space as if it owed him something. "Sorry, ma'am," he had said. "Not sorry, never sorry, didn't see you there." She had swallowed the reply that rose to her throat. She swallowed worse over the years. She learned that reacting was often exactly what men like him wanted. Give them nothing. Let them starve. Her fingers brushed the edge of a photograph, an annotated image of a mountain pass, shadows mapped with care. She slid it back into the folder. This mattered, more than pride, more than humiliation. Lives depended on it. She was rising when the door opened. Not slammed, not announced, just opened. And the room changed. Sarah felt it before she saw it. The sudden straightening of spines, the reflexive snap to attention that came from somewhere deeper than thought. Even Harrington stiffened. She looked up. 4 figures stood framed by the harsh Afghan sunlight. 4 uniforms that carried weight without needing to say a word. 4 sets of eyes that scanned the room and then stopped. On her. For a half-second, Sarah wondered if she was imagining it. Fatigue could do that. 36 hours without sleep could bend reality. But then it happened. They saluted her. Not the colonel, not the senior officers at the table, her. The air left her lungs. Instinct kicked in late, but it kicked in hard. She snapped to attention, returned the salute with precision she didn't know she still had in her. General Wolfenberger's voice cut through the stunned quiet. Calm, certain. "Captain Mitchell, your report reached Central Command last night." Sarah felt every eye in the room on her back. "Ma'am," she said evenly, though her heart was racing now. "I was scheduled to brief Colonel Williams this morning." General Hayes didn't smile, but something softened in her eyes. "You already did more than that." The words hung there, unexplained, dangerous. They asked for a private room. As Sarah followed them out past the tables, past Harrington's frozen expression, a thought crept in uninvited. Whatever this was, it wasn't over, and whatever came next would demand more than she had already given. Why did recognition always arrive hand in hand with risk? She didn't know it yet, but that morning would split her life into 2 clean halves, before the mess hall and everything that followed. Why had she always trusted patterns more than people? The secure briefing room was colder than the mess hall, the air scrubbed and humming with unseen machinery. Sarah stood where she was told, hands clasped behind her back, eyes forward. She'd been in rooms like this before, but never with this much gravity pressing down on her shoulders. General Richards spread a map across the table, not her map, a broader one, connections branching outward like veins. "Captain," he said, "your analysis revealed more than a smuggling route." Sarah frowned slightly, the smallest crack in her composure. "Ma'am, sir, I believed it indicated." "A network," General Chen finished. "One we've been circling for years." Her stomach tightened. She thought of the nights she'd spent tracing those lines, chasing anomalies everyone else dismissed as noise. She felt something then, a quiet certainty and fear. "Operation Shadowfall is now active," Wolfenberger said. The name landed like a physical blow. Shadowfall was rumor. Classified whispers traded between intelligence officers after midnight. A mission that had been greenlit, scrubbed, revived, and buried again. And you, Hayes added, are leading the ground element. Sarah's breath caught. With respect, ma'am, I'm intelligence. You're more than what your title says, Wolfenberger replied. Your record speaks clearly. It always came back to that ambush. Kandahar, the dust, the screams, the radio slick with blood. She hadn't put that story in any report. Some things lived only inside you. 12 hours later, the mountains swallowed them. Night vision turned the world into shades of green and black. Sarah moved at the front, senses stretched thin, every step measured. 8 operators behind her, trusting her. She felt the weight of that trust heavier than her gear. The cave entrance was wrong. Too open, too quiet. Her pulse quickened. Hold, she whispered, something off. She didn't get to finish the thought. The explosion tore the night apart. She hit the ground hard, breath ripped from her chest. Rocks rained down. Shouts filled her comms. She forced herself up, ignoring the ringing in her ears. 3 down. Her mind narrowed. Training took over. There was no room for fear yet. She fired, moved, redirected enemy attention exactly where she wanted it. Pain flared in her arm. She welcomed it. Pain meant she was still in the fight. As she slammed into cover, gasping, one truth crystallized in her chest. They were outmatched. And somewhere close, too close, was the man whose shadow had darkened too many graves. Malik Zadran. Why did the moment of choice always arrive when you had the least left to give? Blood soaked into the dirt beneath Sarah's knee as she pressed herself against the boulder. Her arm burned. Her thigh screamed where the bullet had torn through muscle. She forced the pain into a corner of her mind. Inventory first. Ammo low, 3 wounded, enemy closing. Rodriguez's voice crackled through the comm, controlled but tight. Captain, we're stabilizing, but we can't hold long. She checked her magazine. 4 rounds. She almost laughed, almost. Then she saw him. Tall, distinctive armor, moving with the confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable. Malik Zadran wasn't hiding. He was directing. The world narrowed again. This was why her report had mattered. This was why the generals had flown in. This moment. Her chest tightened with something dangerously close to hope. Rodriguez, she said quietly, I've got eyes on Zadran. Silence, then say again. I'm going after him, she continued before doubt could creep in. When I engage, you extract the wounded. Captain, that's in order. She cut the channel. Moving hurt, every step sent fire through her leg. She welcomed that too. Pain anchored her, kept her present. She moved like she'd been taught, low, silent, invisible. The guard spotted her too late. Gunfire erupted. She rolled, returned fire, neutralized the threat, but the damage was done. Zadran was running. She ran too. The bullet hit her leg harder this time. She went down, the world tilting violently. Through the haze she saw him turn, saw the muzzle rise. She reached for her knife. Then the sky roared. Apache gunships tore over the ridge, night exploding into sound and light. Zadran vanished into chaos, his men scattered. As medics dragged her toward the helicopter, Sarah's hand closed around something cold and solid. A satellite phone, dropped in the rush. She didn't smile. She just held on. Why did failure feel heavier, even when the mission succeeded? The hospital smelled like antiseptic and quiet. Sarah woke slowly, pain blooming as sensation returned. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory crashed back in. General Wolfenberger stood beside her bed. Your team made it, she said simply. All of them. Relief hit Sarah so hard her vision blurred. Zadran escaped, she whispered. Wolfenberger raised an eyebrow and left us his entire network. The phone, of course. The president has been briefed, the general continued. 3 lieutenants captured, more coming. Sarah turned her face away slightly. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt tired, hollowed out. A week later, she returned to the mess hall with a cane and a limp she couldn't hide. The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't disbelief. It was respect. Harrington stood, shame etched into his face. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The ceremony was brief. The silver star was heavy in her hand. The words washed over her without fully landing. Later, Harrington approached. "I was wrong," he said quietly. Sarah nodded. That was enough. 6 months later, she sat in a helicopter bound for another mission, the mountains stretching out below her once more. She thought of that first silence, the papers on the floor, the salute. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the silence in that briefing room feel heavier than the explosion that would come hours later? Sarah Mitchell stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on the map, but her thoughts were already racing ahead of the words being spoken. Operation Shadowfall. The name echoed inside her chest like a warning bell she couldn't silence. She had chased fragments of this operation for years, half-redacted files, closed-door briefings she wasn't invited to, quiet glances between senior officers when certain names surfaced. Now it was no longer a ghost story whispered after midnight. It was real, and it was hers. "Captain," General Wolfenberger said again, her tone firm but not unkind, "I need to know if you understand what we're asking." Sarah inhaled slowly. She understood more than they realized. This wasn't just about skill. This was about trust, about stepping into a space few were allowed to occupy, and fewer still were expected to survive. "Yes, ma'am," she said. Her voice didn't shake. Inside, something trembled anyway. General Hayes studied her closely. "You look calm." "I am," Sarah replied after a beat, "but calm doesn't mean unafraid." A faint nod, approval maybe. The truth was, fear had been her constant companion since Kandahar. It woke with her, sat beside her in briefings, whispered to her when the lights went out. She had learned not to banish it but to listen to it. Fear, when respected, sharpened you. The generals exchanged a look, then Richard spoke. "We deploy tonight." Just like that. No time to sit with it, no time to doubt. As she left the room, Sarah felt the familiar weight settle over her shoulders. Responsibility, lives, consequences. She passed Marines who snapped to attention as she walked by, their respect sudden and disorienting. An hour ago, she had been invisible. Now she was something else entirely. And she didn't know which version of herself scared her more. Back in her quarters, she laid out her gear with methodical care. Every movement deliberate. Weapon, extra mags, medical kit, the satellite imagery she knew by heart. At the bottom of her pack, she tucked the small compass that had belonged to her grandfather. She never brought it into combat, not officially. But it went with her anyway. A reminder that she wasn't the first to walk into uncertainty, and she wouldn't be the last. She paused, staring at her reflection in the dull metal of the locker. 32 years old. Lines at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there before the war. She wondered briefly who she might have been in another life. Then she shut the locker. That life didn't exist. The helicopter ride was quiet. No jokes, no bravado. These operators didn't need noise to fill the space. They trusted preparation. They trusted each other. And now, whether they admitted it or not, they were trusting her. Rodriguez caught her eye across the cabin. He didn't smile. He just nodded once. It was enough. When the skids finally touched down miles from the objective, the mountains loomed like silent witnesses. The air was thin, sharp. Every breath tasted like metal. Sarah led them forward, the terrain matching the images she'd memorized, but something felt wrong. Too clean, too still. Her pulse quickened. Ignored instincts had gotten people killed before. She wouldn't let that happen here. "Slow it down," she whispered into the comm. "We're being watched." They adjusted without question. That trust tightened something in her chest. She carried it with her as they moved deeper into the pass. And then the world shattered. The blast threw her backward, the ground rushing up to meet her. For a split second there was nothing. No sound, no thought, just white. Then pain. She forced herself up, senses flooding back all at once. Screams, gunfire, dust choking the air. She counted bodies, 3 down, too many. Training took over where emotion threatened to break through. She shouted orders, her voice cutting through the chaos with a clarity she didn't feel. She fired when she had to, moved when she needed to. Every decision came with a cost she knew she'd tally later in the quiet hours. When she finally hit cover, her chest heaved as she tried to slow her breathing. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Her intel had been solid, she knew it had. Which meant one thing. They'd been waiting. That realization settled like ice in her veins. Someone had anticipated them. Someone smart, someone patient. Malik Zadran. The name surfaced unbidden, heavy with history and loss. He wasn't just a target. He was a symbol of every roadside bomb, every folded flag, every unanswered knock on a door back home. And he was close. When she saw him, really saw him, directing fire with calm authority, something inside her shifted. The mission changed shape in her mind, crystallizing around a single point. This was why she was here. Her leg burned as she moved, but she welcomed the pain. It reminded her she was alive, that she still had a choice. She made it quickly, no ceremony, just necessity. Rodriguez protested, of course. He was supposed to. She cut him off anyway. Leaders didn't always get consensus. Sometimes they just got consequences. She moved alone through the dark, every step a calculation. She thought of Kandahar, of the radio slick with blood, of the moment she'd realized no one else was going to make the call. Some patterns never changed. When the shot hit her thigh, the pain was blinding. She hit the ground hard, breath knocked from her lungs. The world narrowed to sound and motion. Zadran turned, raising his weapon with infuriating calm. For a heartbeat she thought this was it. Not fear, just clarity. Then the sky came alive. The roar of helicopters tore through the night, violence answered by overwhelming force. She laughed once, breathless and disbelieving as medics reached her. As they lifted her, her hand closed around the satellite phone. Solid, real, heavy with possibility. Even in pain, she knew what it meant. Later, in the hospital, when the adrenaline had faded and the cost began to surface, Sarah stared at the ceiling and replayed every decision, every second, every choice that could have gone another way. Her team survived. The network was unraveling. And still, she felt the weight of what she hadn't finished. Failure and success had a way of intertwining until you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. When she finally slept, it wasn't peace she found. It was resolve. Because some missions don't end when the shooting stops. They end when you decide who you are willing to become to see them through. Why did waking up feel harder than getting shot? The pain reached her before memory did, a dull, insistent ache that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Sarah Mitchell opened her eyes slowly as if speed might shatter whatever fragile order still held her together. White ceiling, fluorescent light, the faint, rhythmic beep of a monitor nearby. Hospital, she knew that much. Her body felt foreign, heavy, disconnected. She tried to move her leg and stopped when fire shot up her spine. A breath escaped her lips, sharp and involuntary. So this was the aftermath. For a moment she lay still, staring upward, letting the reality settle. She had survived. Again. And with survival came the reckoning she knew too well. The quiet hours when the noise faded and everything you'd held at bay came rushing back. Faces surfaced in her mind. Rodriguez shouting over gunfire. The medic's hands slick with blood. Zadran turning, weapon rising. The split second where she had accepted that she might not leave that mountain alive. Her jaw tightened. Acceptance didn't mean peace. The curtain shifted, soft footsteps. She turned her head slightly, wincing, and saw General Wolfenberger standing beside the bed. No entourage, no ceremony. Just a woman who had seen too much war to waste words. "Your vitals are stable," the general said. "Doctors say you'll keep the leg." Sarah huffed a weak breath. "That's reassuring." A pause, then quieter. "Your team made it, every one of them." The tension in Sarah's chest finally broke. Her eyes closed for a moment, moisture burning behind the lids. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding that fear until it loosened. "And Zadran?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Gone," Wolfenberger said honestly, "but not untouched." Sarah opened her eyes again. "The phone." A nod, it cracked everything open. Relief and frustration tangled inside her. They had won something enormous and lost the one thing that had felt within reach. She turned her face toward the wall. "I should have finished it," she said quietly. Wolfenberger didn't interrupt. She waited. That, more than any reassurance, cut deeper. "I hesitated," Sarah continued. "Half a second, long enough for him to move. People will pay for that." The general stepped closer. "People were already paying, Captain. You changed the math." Sarah swallowed. The words sounded right, they just didn't feel right, not yet. After the general left, the room felt emptier than before. The beeping monitor seemed louder. Time stretched. Nurses came and went. Pain meds dulled the edges but left her thoughts sharp. She replayed the mission again and again, searching for a version where it all ended cleaner. There wasn't one. By the third day, word had spread. Visitors started arriving, officers she barely knew, intelligence analysts who spoke in hushed, reverent tones, even a few Marines from FOB Resolute. They thanked her, called her brave, called her inspiring. She nodded, accepted, but every compliment slid off her like rain on stone. That afternoon, Rodriguez came. He looked tired, older. His uniform still carried the dust of the mountains. He stood awkwardly at the foot of her bed, hands clasped behind his back like he didn't know what to do with them. "You scared the hell out of us," he said finally. Sarah managed a small smile. "You extracted clean." "We did," he agreed. Then his voice softened. "Because of you." Silence stretched between them. This one wasn't heavy, just honest. "You made the right call," he said, "even if it doesn't feel like it." She met his gaze. "Does it ever?" Rodriguez exhaled through his nose. "No." When he left, she felt something shift inside her. Not relief, not closure, something quieter, acceptance maybe, or the beginning of it. A week later, she returned to FOB Resolute. Walking hurt, pride hurt more. She hated the cane, hated the way it announced her weakness before she could speak, but she used it anyway. Stubbornness was useless if it got people hurt. The moment she stepped into the mess hall, conversation died. The same room, the same tables, the same floor where her papers had scattered. But the silence was different now. Marines stood, chairs scraped back. No one laughed, no one whispered. They just stood there, eyes forward, respect heavy in the air. Sarah froze for half a second, unsure how to react. Then she straightened, squared her shoulders and walked through them, cane tapping softly against the floor. She didn't look for Harrington. She didn't need to. Later, as she sat alone with a cup of coffee she barely tasted, Colonel Williams approached. He saluted crisply. "Captain," he said, "command needs you." She nodded, rising carefully. As she did, someone stepped into her path. Harrington. He looked different, smaller somehow, his bravado stripped away. "Captain Mitchell," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." She studied him for a moment, the man who had dismissed her, mocked her, reduced her work to maps. "I was wrong," he continued, "about you, about what matters." Sarah searched her own feelings and found no anger there, no satisfaction either, just distance. "I didn't do this for you," she said simply. He swallowed. "I know." That was enough. The ceremony came later, brief, formal. The silver star pinned to her uniform while words echoed she barely registered. Cameras flashed. Applause followed. She felt detached, like she was watching someone else receive it. That night she sat alone outside her quarters, the Afghan sky stretched wide above her. Stars burned cold and bright. She held her grandfather's compass in her hand, thumb tracing the worn edges. He had believed in quiet strength, in doing what needed to be done without needing to be seen. She wondered what he would think of her now. 6 months passed. Recovery was slow. Physical therapy hurt more than the wound itself, but she pushed through it one step at a time. The limp faded, the memories didn't. She was offered safer assignments, desk roles, advisory positions. She declined them all. When the call came to lead a new special intelligence unit, one that blurred the line between analysis and action, she accepted without hesitation. The night before their first deployment, she stood alone on the tarmac, helicopter blades already spinning. The team waited for her signal. She felt the old anxiety creep in, the familiar weight, but alongside it was something new. Clarity. She had been ignored, doubted, pushed aside. She had been wounded, broken, left with scars that would never fully fade. And still she stood here. She climbed into the helicopter, took her seat, and closed her eyes as it lifted into the dark. Sometimes respect doesn't arrive when you ask for it. Sometimes it arrives when you endure long enough to become undeniable. And sometimes the quietest strength is simply choosing to go back into the storm, knowing exactly what it costs, and going anyway. Why did the nights feel louder once the helicopters stopped flying? Sarah learned quickly that survival didn't end when the mission did. It followed you home. It sat beside your bed. It waited patiently in the dark for moments of quiet, then filled them with echoes you hadn't invited. The new unit was hers now, on paper at least. Special intelligence, hybrid operations, analysts who could move, operators who could think. It was exactly what Shadowfall had proven was necessary, and exactly the kind of responsibility that didn't let you sleep easily. The first briefing was supposed to be routine, a low-risk insertion, surveillance only, no heroics, no deviations. Sarah stood at the head of the table, eyes moving slowly from face to face. Some were younger than her, some older, all experienced, all watching her carefully. Not with doubt, with curiosity. That unsettled her more than skepticism ever had. She cleared her throat. "I don't expect trust on day one," she said. "I expect discipline, questions, and honesty when something feels wrong." A pause. "If you need a leader who promises certainty," she continued, "I'm not it. If you need someone who will tell you when they're afraid so we can plan around it, I am." No one spoke. Then one of the operators nodded, another followed. Slowly the room shifted. She felt it, the fragile beginning of something real. Later that night, alone in her quarters, the confidence drained away. She sat on the edge of the bed, boots still on, hands clasped tightly together. The weight of command pressed down harder when no one was watching. She thought of the men and women who would follow her into the dark. And she wondered, quietly, whether they would all come back. The mission came 3 weeks later. Different mountains, same silence. Intel suggested a meeting between mid-level operatives connected to Zadran's network. Not enough to justify a full strike, enough to justify watching. Sarah moved with the team, every step familiar, every sensation sharpened. Her leg held, her body obeyed, but something inside her resisted relaxing. She recognized it now. Fear of repetition. The meeting site was a ruined compound half swallowed by stone and time, cracked walls, open sky, too many angles. They set up observation, waited. Minutes stretched into hours. Her radio hissed softly, status checks, breathing, wind. Then movement. Sarah raised her binoculars, heart ticking faster. Figures entered the compound, armed, alert, not relaxed enough for a meeting. Her instincts flared. "This isn't right," she whispered. "They're hunting." Before anyone could respond, gunfire shattered the stillness. They scattered, returning fire, slipping into cover. No explosion this time, no ambush from above, just chaos, fast and close. Sarah moved without thinking, directing, adjusting, adapting. This was different from Shadowfall, smaller, messier, more personal. She saw one of her analysts freeze behind a low wall, fear locking him in place. Rounds kicked up dust inches from his head. "Move," she shouted, not angry, urgent. "Now." He hesitated. Sarah broke cover. The decision wasn't noble, it wasn't calculated, it was instinct, raw and immediate. She grabbed him, dragged him back, bullets snapping past them. Pain flared in her leg, sharp and bright. She bit it back. They reached safety. The fight ended quickly after that. The enemy broke, disappeared into the terrain they knew too well. No fatalities, one injury. Success by every metric that mattered. And still, as the adrenaline faded, Sarah's hands began to shake. Back at base, the team moved with quiet efficiency. Weapons cleared, gear stowed, reports filed. One by one they passed her. Some nodded, some said thank you. One stopped. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly. The analyst she'd pulled from the wall. "Yes," she replied, "I did." He studied her for a moment. "You didn't hesitate." She didn't answer. Because she had. She just hadn't let him see it. That night she sat alone again, the ache in her leg deep and persistent. She pressed ice against it, stared at the far wall. Kandahar surfaced without warning, the same moment, the same choice. She had run then too. She wondered if she always would. A message arrived the next morning, high priority, secure channel. Central Command wanted her stateside. The flight home felt unreal, familiar in all the wrong ways, the hum of engines, the forced stillness. She stared out the window at clouds she couldn't touch and thought about the girl she'd been before the uniform, before the scars, before the understanding that leadership meant carrying everyone else's fear along with your own. Washington greeted her with clean air and polished floors. The building was quiet, controlled, nothing like the chaos she'd left behind. In the conference room, faces turned toward her. Civilian suits, senior officers, measured expressions. They spoke of strategy, of expansion, of precedent. Finally, someone asked the question she'd been waiting for. "Captain Mitchell, do you believe you can continue operating in the field after your injuries?" The room stilled. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She thought of the analyst's frozen eyes, of the medic's hands, of the nights that still stole her breath. "I believe," she said slowly, "that I understand the cost better than I used to." And the man pressed. "And I still choose to go," she finished. "Not because I'm unafraid, because I know what happens when no one does." Silence followed. Then a nod. Approval. Later, alone in a quiet hallway, Sarah leaned briefly against the wall, letting the composure slip for just a second. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished surface. Tired, scarred, steady. She realized then that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about carrying it forward, carefully, so others didn't have to bear it alone. When she returned to her unit, they were waiting. Not at attention. Just waiting. She stepped toward them, feeling the familiar weight settle once more. Some people led by being the loudest voice in the room. Others led by stepping forward when the room went silent. And sometimes, the bravest thing a person could do was keep showing up, long after the applause faded, choosing purpose over peace, again and again. Why did the hardest decisions always come when no one was watching? The call came just before dawn when the base was quiet enough to hear your own thoughts. Sarah was already awake. She usually was. Sleep came in fragments now, thin, unreliable. She sat on the edge of her bunk, boots laced, gear half-packed, when the secure line vibrated. She didn't rush to answer it. She had learned that urgency didn't disappear just because you paused. Sometimes, pausing was the only way to stay ahead of it. When she finally picked up, the voice on the other end didn't waste time. Coordinates, time window, minimal support, high uncertainty. A ghost of a mission. Sarah closed her eyes as the details settled in. This wasn't a follow-up. It wasn't cleanup. This was the kind of operation designed to fail quietly if it went wrong. No press, no ceremony, no medals waiting on the other side. She said yes anyway. By the time the sun crept over the horizon, her team was assembled. No speeches, no motivational lines. They knew the rhythm by now. They trusted it, trusted her. But trust didn't erase doubt. It lived beside it. As the helicopter lifted off, Sarah watched the ground fall away, her reflection faint in the glass. She looked older than she felt. Or maybe she felt older than she was. It was hard to tell anymore. She thought of the people who wouldn't know this mission existed. The families back home eating breakfast, unaware that their safety sometimes hinged on decisions made in the dark by people they would never meet. The thought didn't feel heroic. It felt heavy. The insertion was clean, too clean. The terrain stretched out before them, dry, broken, unforgiving. Sarah moved at the front, senses tuned, every sound catalogued. Wind, footsteps, distant metal. They reached the structure just after nightfall, an abandoned relay station, half collapsed, forgotten by everyone except the people using it now. Signals confirmed movement inside. Not many. Enough. Sarah raised a fist. The team froze. She listened. A voice drifted out through a broken wall, calm, familiar. Her chest tightened. She knew that voice. Not personally, not by name, but by consequence. This man was Zadran. He was worse in some ways. Smarter, quieter, a connector. The kind of person who didn't pull triggers but decided where they would be pulled. A man who never expected to see her. Sarah felt the old tension coil in her gut. The same one she'd felt in the mess hall months ago. The same one she'd felt staring down a rifle barrel in the mountains. History didn't repeat itself. But it rhymed. The breach was fast, controlled, over in seconds. No shots fired, hands up. Shock on faces that had grown used to operating in shadows. As they secured the room, Sarah stepped forward, light catching the man's eyes. Recognition flickered there. Calculation followed. "You," he said softly. "I wondered when you'd come looking." She didn't answer. He smiled anyway. "They don't know what they've sent you into, do they?" Sarah met his gaze evenly. "They know enough." He laughed under his breath. "That's what they always think." As they escorted him out, something he said lingered, sharp and unwelcome. Doubt had a way of finding cracks. Extraction came with complications. It always did. Movement on the ridge, unplanned, fast. "Contact," someone whispered. The firefight was brief but intense, close enough to smell cordite, close enough to hear breathing through comms spike with adrenaline. Sarah moved between positions, voice steady even as her pulse hammered. She felt the familiar burn in her leg, ignored it. They broke contact, barely. When the helicopter finally rose into the air, the team slumped into exhausted silence. No cheers, no relief yet, just the quiet accounting of who was still breathing. "Everyone." Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Back at base, the detainee was transferred without ceremony. Paperwork replaced gunfire. Questions replaced commands. Sarah answered what she could, left out what couldn't be said without context that didn't exist on paper. Late that night, she sat alone outside again, staring up at a sky that felt impossibly distant. The mission had been a success. The network fractured further. More lives, statistically speaking, would be saved. And still, she thought of the man's smile, of the certainty in his voice, of the systems that kept regenerating no matter how many pieces you removed. She wondered how long she could keep doing this before something inside her finally gave way. The next morning, a message waited for her. Promotion. Not field level, strategic, oversight, influence. The kind of position people spent careers chasing. Sarah stared at the screen for a long time. This was the moment others dreamed about. The chance to step back from the edge, to trade boots for briefings, to lead without bleeding. She imagined it, clean clothes, predictable hours, fewer names carved into memory. And then she imagined the nights. The quiet ones. She requested 24 hours. That evening she walked the perimeter alone. The bass hummed softly behind her. Somewhere someone laughed, somewhere else someone cried. She stopped near the fence, resting her hands on the cold metal. Leadership, she had learned, wasn't about how high you climbed. It was about where you chose to stand when it mattered. The next day, she declined the promotion. Not forever, just not yet. The response came quickly. Confusion, concern, a warning thinly veiled. Sarah accepted all of it without flinching. When she returned to her team, they didn't ask why. They didn't need to. They just adjusted their gear and waited for her signal. As they boarded the helicopter once more, Sarah felt the familiar weight settle in. It didn't crush her anymore. It shaped her. She wasn't chasing redemption now. She was practicing responsibility. And in a world that thrived on noise and recognition, she chose the quieter path, the one where dignity didn't announce itself, where strength wasn't measured by applause, and where showing up again and again was its own kind of courage. Some battles didn't end. They asked you who you were willing to be in the space between them. And Sarah Mitchell had learned to answer, not with words but with presence. Why did the quiet feel heavier now than any battlefield she had ever crossed? Sarah noticed it the moment the helicopter lifted off for what would become her final mission with the unit. Not heavier with fear, not heavier with anticipation, heavier with awareness. The kind that only comes after you've survived long enough to recognize patterns, not just in terrain or enemy behavior, but in yourself. The rotors thundered overhead, wind tearing at loose straps, but inside her chest there was an unexpected stillness. Not peace, something closer to acceptance. She studied the faces around her, familiar now, scarred in small, personal ways. These weren't just operators or analysts anymore. They were people whose breathing patterns she recognized in the dark, whose silences she could interpret better than words. She had led them long enough to know what each carried quietly. The mission itself was straightforward, a final thread in a network already collapsing under its own weight. No legendary target, no dramatic confrontation, just confirmation, closure. And yet, Sarah felt the weight of it more than any operation before. Because endings, she had learned, were harder than beginnings. The insertion went smoothly. The night wrapped around them like a held breath. Sarah moved through it with practiced ease, but her thoughts drifted inward despite herself. She remembered the mess hall, the papers on the floor, the heat in her face as laughter had brushed past her like she wasn't there. She remembered the salute. How confusing it had been, how undeserved it had felt in that moment. She understood it now. Respect wasn't about rank or recognition. It was about accumulation, of choices, of restraint, of showing up when it would have been easier not to. The confirmation came quietly, signals matched, evidence logged, the last piece locked into place. Mission complete. As they withdrew, a single shot rang out from somewhere beyond the ridge. Wild, desperate. It missed by meters, disappearing harmlessly into stone. Sarah didn't flinch. Neither did her team. They moved on. Back at base, the debrief was short, efficient, final. Higher command thanked her with language polished by years of distance from the field. She accepted it with the same calm professionalism she'd learned to use for praise and criticism alike. Then came the conversation she'd known was waiting. A closed office. No uniforms this time, just quiet authority. "You've done enough," one of them said, not unkindly, more than enough. Sarah listened. Let the words land, let them settle. "You've proven everything you needed to prove," another added, "to anyone." That part almost made her smile. They offered her a permanent role, strategic oversight, policy shaping, the chance to influence missions before they ever reached the dirt, the kind of position that could change the system from within. This time, she didn't ask for 24 hours. She nodded. "I'll take it," she said, then after a pause on one condition. They waited. "I finished saying goodbye," she continued, "in my own way." No one argued. That night Sarah walked the base alone for the last time. She didn't announce it, didn't gather anyone. She stopped by the flight line, the armory, the mess hall. The same one. The tables were rearranged now. New faces, new stories being told too loudly. She stood near the doorway for a moment unseen. She didn't feel anger. She felt distance and relief. Outside, she sat on a low concrete barrier and pulled the compass from her pocket, her grandfather. The metal was worn smooth from decades of hands and hardship. She turned it slowly, watching the needle steady itself no matter how she moved. North didn't care about storms. It didn't care about doubt. It simply pointed. The next morning, she addressed her team. No speeches, no ceremony. "I won't be on the next flight," she said simply. No gasps, no protests, just quiet understanding. They had felt it coming even if they hadn't wanted to name it. "You'll be fine," she added, "better than fine." Rodriguez met her eyes. "We know." One by one they stepped forward, handshakes, brief embraces, words that mattered because they were few. When it was done, Sarah stood alone again as the helicopter lifted away without her. Dust kicked up around her boots. The sound faded. For the first time in years, she didn't follow it. Weeks later, in a different building, in a different kind of quiet, Sarah sat at a desk overlooking a city that never truly slept. Papers replaced weapons. Decisions replaced directives. The weight was still there. But it was different. She carried the field with her into every meeting, every policy review, every argument about acceptable risk. She spoke when silence would have been easier. She listened when others rushed to conclusions. Some nights the echoes still came. She let them, because they reminded her why she chose this path. Months later, she received a message from a young officer stationed at a forward base. A woman, brilliant, overlooked. The message was short. "They don't take me seriously. Any advice?" Sarah stared at the screen for a long time. Then she typed back. "Do the work anyway. Let it speak. And when it gets heavy, remember you're not alone, even when it feels like you are." She sent it and leaned back, eyes closing briefly. She didn't know if the message would change anything. But she knew it mattered. Years later, long after the missions blurred together in classified files, people would talk about operations that succeeded because someone saw what others ignored, about decisions that saved lives without ever making headlines. Her name wouldn't always be attached to those stories. She was fine with that, because she had learned something essential in the silence between gunfire and applause. Strength didn't need witnesses. Leadership didn't need permission. And dignity, real dignity, was never loud. Sometimes it was a woman picking up scattered papers without raising her voice. Sometimes it was walking back into danger when no one expected you to. And sometimes it was knowing when to step aside so others could move forward stronger than you ever were. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.